Are you looking to make a professional pivot because you're no longer growing where you are? Or do you worry that others think your dreams, ambitions, or pivot are too radical? Well, you're in the right place. Welcome to the RCW Video Podcast, where women come and share their career journeys. You'll leave with a bag full of tools and be inspired to make your next move. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. It's me and Anjli again. I think many of you remember Anjli from the podcast. You can check out me and hers podcast episode. Anjli is an executive coach. She's a wonderful coach. She's coached me through a lot of stuff. And today we're going to talk about rumination. And rumination, you're like, what is that? I Googled. It's a cycle of negative thinking that involves dwelling on negative feelings, distress, and their causes and consequences. It can also involve overthinking and dwelling on negative events rather than focusing on solutions or positive outcomes. So we get stuck in a cycle of negative thinking. I know Anjli probably will have some more to add to what rumination is.
Thanks, Rhonda. Yes, it's definitely something that a lot of high achievers, including myself, have struggled with in the past. There's two forms of rumination. One is replaying past events, thinking about the same event over and over again, wishing that you had done something differently, made different decisions, said something different. There's an element of that regret or just rehashing the thing to try to understand what went wrong and what you can do differently. But more with rumination, there's more of a lens of self-criticism and judgment or judgment of others and resistance to what is. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. The other form of rumination is worry about the future. This is where we sit around and we think about whether we should make this decision or that. And if we make this decision, what could happen? What could go wrong? And all the ways in which maybe we did something at work and you're like, oh my God, that was a mistake. And how's that going to affect my career now? Any number of ways where we think about future outcomes and we sit there and play out worst case scenarios. Those are two forms of rumination that seem to come up a lot with high achievers in my practice and also in my past.
So where does it come from? Where does rumination come from? Why do we experience this?
A lot of rumination is rooted in this sense of what is it that I did wrong or what did someone else do wrong and why was it that way? Or avoiding something bad happening in the future by thinking that if we keep thinking about the worst case scenarios, that somehow it'll make something different or it will prep us for disappointment. So we're not disappointed when that thing happens, for example. But when we're living in that cycle, there's a few things that are happening to us that become very toxic for us and result in burnout. If it's chronic, it keeps us up at night. It disturbs our sleep. It also takes away your opportunity to be productive in that moment, if you will, or use that energy towards something that will help you. Basically, what we're doing is we're using our imagination in a way that causes us suffering. Right? It's a form of entertainment, if you think about it. I know that sounds really strange, but it's a form of entertainment because it's not real. Rumination, whether you're thinking about and replaying the past or you're worrying about what will happen in the future, is all a figment of our imagination because it's not actually happening right now. So we keep from being in the present.
So when I think about the feelings that come along with rumination, when I take myself to that place of anxiousness, just almost like a chronic anxiety, it's debilitating. I cannot move. I'm stuck in this cycle. I imagine that would just have a really negative effect on one's well-being. Can you talk a bit about that?
Absolutely. So rumination affects us in many different ways, right? Because it's taking our energy in three different ways. One, it's sapping our energy because we're using energy in a way that is, we're taking a part of our energy and we're employing it in this cycle. So when you're using your imagination, you're using your creative mind, your mental energy to replay an event over and over again, whether it's the past or whether it's what might happen in the future. So you're engaged in an activity, and that mental energy cannot be used for anything else, right? Because that's what it's engaged in. So that in itself is an activity, and it does take up energy. So even though when we feel like we have so much to do, we didn't do anything today, we just sat there and ruminated, it ate up a bunch of your energy in doing that process. That's number one way in which it exhausts us. The second way is it's a resistance to what is. So when we're in the past or we're in the future, we're not in the present. So we're either wishing that the present was different, because if the past was different, then our present would be different. Or we want the future to have a certain outcome. We're afraid that it won't have that outcome, and therefore we're not in that present that is. Right? So we're sitting up late at night. So this can happen a lot of times, right? You sit up, you have a child, you're waiting for the child to come home, and it's getting later and later, and you're imagining, oh, there may be in a car accident, or this happened, or that happened. All of that future imagining of what could be the case actually never ends up being the case, but you've just spent those hours sitting there, not with what was there in front of you, right? Whether you might be having a conversation with someone in the house, or reading a book, or watching TV, or whatever it is, you're sitting there in your imagination wondering about what might be. So you're not in what is at the moment. So that resistance to what is creates a friction in our lives that also burns energy.
Okay.
The other thing that it results in, and you mentioned that, is the emotions that it creates. So when we're in this negative thinking, because usually the rumination and the imagination that we're doing is in the negative patterns, right? When you're experiencing that, our imagination's also creating those emotions within us, whether it's anxiety or stress, or it's anger, right? Oh, why did this happen to me? Why did this person speak to me? Or it's fear that, oh, you made a mistake on this thing at work, and what's that going to happen on Monday morning when you get into work? What's your boss going to say? And those uncomfortable emotions also take up your energy and well-being. And what ends up happening for most of us is we want to suppress those emotions because they don't feel good, which results in even more energy, because emotions are energy as well. And if we don't allow them to resolve themselves and we suppress them because they don't feel good to feel, we end up using more energy to keep those emotions in place. And when they sit there in our bodies, they create all sorts of unease or dis-ease, right? That disease is really dis-ease of the mind, body, and spirit. And it creates that. So there's a number of levels in which our energy and our well-being is affected by rumination.
And imagine what positive things we could be doing with all of that energy. And we could be putting it into enjoying time with the people that we love. We could be putting it into enjoying the beautiful weather outside. Or thinking about being grateful for the things that are going wonderfully in our lives. We can redirect that energy into something else. But when we are allowing a negative experience to consume it, and then, as Anjli pointed out, consume us physically, creating disease. But when we think about that intellectually, it just doesn't make sense, does it? But Anjli, is that where we're coming from with this, our intellect, when we're experiencing this rumination?
It's fear-based behavior. And we know, like you mentioned, that we could be doing better things with our time. And so many of my clients come to me and saying, I want to be present with my family. I want to be present with myself. I want to be present. And I feel like I'm just sitting here spinning in my thoughts and worrying about the future. And I want to be here, but I don't know how. And so you're absolutely right. These are intelligent people. They know that this isn't serving them, that this behavior is not serving them, but it's not conscious. It's It's something where it's like a program. That's how I like to speak about it with people. These patterns and behaviors are programs. They're not something that we are consciously doing. They're running behind the scenes. They're scripts that we wrote long, long time ago. And again, unconsciously, not intentionally. And they're just running the show. And it takes an enormous amount of effort for a person to try to overcome that programming intellectually. Right. So maybe you catch yourself ruminating and worrying, like, oh my God, this is so useless. I don't know what's going to happen. Why am I doing this? And then you go back into the same track. Because it's not something we can deal with at an intellectual level or reason with ourselves about. These patterns of rumination came in because of that fear of the consequences. Because of other patterns about berating ourselves or judging ourselves or others about what's happened in life and feeling like now there's no way forward. That regret. So again, part of the rumination cycle and breaking that cycle is to go back and say, what is this really pointing to? I acknowledge that it's there, acknowledge that this happened, but what is it about that is keeping me stuck? And the biggest thing that helps shift rumination is acceptance of what is. So when we're ruminating about the past, it's acceptance that that thing happened. And when I say acceptance, I'm not saying being okay with it, right? Clear. I'm not saying that you have to like it. So you lost your job. Let's say you were fired from your job and it doesn't feel good. Or what burns a person out is like, it shouldn't have happened. It was unfair. Why did it happen? Why did it happen to me? Right? The why me. And that is all resistance to what is. You have lost your job. And I don't say that to be harsh. It is what it is. Acceptance of what is I did lose my job. Whether it was fair, unfair, whether it should have happened or shouldn't have happened, it has happened. So it's accepting that thing for what it is. And once you do that, you don't burn your energy in denying it or wishing that it was different.
Yeah, acceptance is something that I've worked on quite a bit because it's not an easy thing to do. So I have to sit with it often in meditation, consciously kind of focusing on the feeling of acceptance. And I find that when I do release that energy and tension around something, I'm freeing up space for a resolution to come into my space, right? Freeing up space for my consciousness to notice that it's even there because my attention is not on whatever the negative, emotion or feeling that this feeling or the situation has brought up. Yeah. So, but acceptance is, I acknowledge it's not easy. It's something that I work on a lot.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because there's this sense of judgment of this. It shouldn't be this way. It's not right that this happened. It should have happened this way. And that, whether that feels good or bad or whether it's right or wrong is irrelevant because the reality of the situation is it did happen. And when you can accept that it has happened, this is the reality of the situation. I'm not happy with it. Then your energy, as you said, can refocus on what is now in front of you and what you can do with it. Mm-hmm. Just the other day, I was talking to somebody and a client of mine who had lost their jobs in a prior, and not in the current situation, they had lost their jobs. At the time, it felt like game over. And then as they looked at it, it gave them the impetus to build something that they would never have built had it not been for that situation. So when you accept that that is the case, then your energy can go towards seeing what is the opportunity for me in this situation.
Yes.
One of the questions I love to ask my clients is, if this was something you orchestrated or the universe orchestrated to help you, And I know it feels bad right now, but if there's a scenario in which you orchestrated this or the universe orchestrated it, why would it have done that? And it's amazing that when you ask that question, and I invite people who are listening to ask that question of themselves, if they're in a situation like that, what is it that it was designed? Why would you have designed it that way? And it's amazing the answers that come to people. And there's such epiphanies that happen in those moments when that question is asked.
Yes. So, I've got an example of something that's happened to me. I wanted Anjali to coach me on something. So, you could view our listener experience what it's like to be coached on rumination. But because I had trouble kind of pulling up a recent experience because I don't struggle with rumination anymore. So I had, thanks to Anjali and other, meditative practices that I engage in. But I did reach back to one maybe 5 years ago or so. I was working at a law firm because I'm a lawyer, and I supported an antitrust partner, and he trusted me to basically handle, it was a $400 million acquisition, and we were representing the acquiring company. And you have to file with the Federal Trade Commission, Department of Justice, papers to get permission for the acquisition or merger to go through. And I had not done this before. And so I made a mistake, and the filing got kicked back and delayed the closing. And I was mortified. I was just like, when I got that email, I panicked. I had a meltdown. I scrambled. I fixed it. I fixed the mistake, but I judged myself for a while. Not a day, not 2 days, but probably weeks. It took me to get over that because I cannot believe I made that mistake. I was so embarrassed. And the partner, who loves me to this day, like I see him out and he just speaks so highly of me. He was just flabbergasted, I think, that I was having such a meltdown over such a small mistake. But so how, Andrew, you have coached me through that?
Yeah. So first thing I would ask you is, what is it about that situation that's causing you distress?
I was afraid that I was going to be seen as dumb, unsmart, incompetent, unworthy of any kind of recognition as a lawyer. I was afraid that people were going to think I was stupid.
Yeah. And then what would happen?
And then I would just not be respected. I would not be loved by the people, who I worked with or for. I would not get promoted. I would not get advanced in my career. Like the world was just over. It was just going to end.
Yeah. And then what would happen?
And then I'd be alone. I wouldn't have anybody. I would just be alone, rejected, destitute. And like listening to this now, it sounds ridiculous. But in that moment, that is what I felt.
Yeah.
And honestly, probably not all consciously. It takes like coaching, like what you're doing now, to actually peel back the layers to understand where this intense emotion is coming from.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right. It's not conscious and it doesn't make sense because it's not our rational brain that's doing it. It's mirroring that fight or flight feeling when like we were in the wild, right? So that animal brain kicks in, the amygdala kicks in. And in your situation, your partner even said to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rhonda, it's no big deal. It's all right. All is well. And so if anything, that was an indication to you that you are still respected. You're still valued and a partner is an authority figure, and he was the partner on the deal, right? But I'm willing to bet that that still was happening, that rumination, that judgment was still happening, and that game over scenario was still happening even after he said that to you, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, because I felt like the Rhonda brand had been tarnished. It was damaged. I was not perfect.
Perfect. Exactly. And that was going to result in this thing of me being alone and friendless and everything game over, as you said, the world is over. And so in that situation, what would bring safety to you? What would have helped you feel like, okay, I'm all right and all is well in the world?
Yeah. A hug, and a feeling of love and acceptance from whomever deep down it really mattered from, who's didn't really matter from the partner. It was from somewhere else, coming from somewhere else, much deeper.
That's it. Because it wasn't, the partner couldn't bring that sense of safety because it was ultimately about you. Am I accepted and loved despite my mistakes?
Right.
Am I loved and accepted even if I don't get it perfect? And that would be where we bring that remedy in. Is that hug. That's that from that person that you need to hear it from most.
Yes. And it's very healing, to take yourself back to that vulnerable child place and give that person, that version of Rhonda a hug. It's very healing, and it's incredible the difference that it makes, and kind of calming or quelling that need to ruminate on other things.
And even now you can go back to that Rhonda, this junior associate, and who had tried something very new in her life and been put in charge of something that she wasn't taught how to do it. She had to figure it out. And she made one small error. You can go back and say, listen, give her compassion. You tried.
Yes. I love that.
And you did your very best.
Exactly.
And you didn't do it perfectly. And the world didn't end. And
the world didn't end.
And you're still loved, and I still love you. And that's the important thing. I still love you, and I accept you, and I see you because you did the best you possibly could in that situation.
And you grew, and you got more jobs, even better ones, and you're fine.
Exactly.
This has been amazing. Thank you again, Anjli, for your expertise and for teaching us today about rumination.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.